reading Salem's Lot gave me the spooks. So much so that I rummaged back through my stuff and I went back and I pulled out my cross and I'm wearing my cross and I'm not taking my cross off. It's sort of just in case. Welcome back to Drunk on Writing and the second in the special Stephen King series of dissections. If you missed the first episode, be sure to go back and check that out. We talked about Carrie, Stephen King's first novel, had a great discussion about it, some odd 20 minutes or so. It was really good. So be sure to go look at that and then come back to here. Because today we're going to talk about Stephen King's follow-up to Carrie. That's right, I'm talking about Salem's Lot. Originally published in 1975, just a little over a year after Carrie, and reportedly King's favorite novel of all the ones that he's written. And even though I've just read it for the first time, I kind of tend to agree. And its adaptation is actually pretty good too, but we'll get to that in just a few minutes. Before we do, let me just remind you, if you want to follow along with these Stephen King dissections, please follow me on Twitter, follow me on Facebook, subscribe to the YouTube channel, or head on over to patreon.com/drunkonwriting, where just $1 will let you get every single one of these dissections 1 week earlier than everyone else. And if you want to chip in a bit more, you can get extra little videos like blooper reels, behind the scenes videos, Q&As, and even more stuff. So all that said, let's talk Salem's Lot. I have to say, I wish I'd read Salem's Lot without knowing a single thing going into it. Now, I didn't exactly go rushing off to Wikipedia for spoilers, but I did read the Dark Tower series in its entirety way long before I ever hit Salem's Lot, and part of that series actually acts as a pseudo-sequel to Salem's Lot. We're going to talk more about the Dark Tower once we hit them, and believe me, there's a lot to talk about there. But in case you haven't read Salem's Lot, in case you don't know a thing about it, may I suggest you go read it before you watch this video. It is so totally worth not spoiling the book, because Stephen King basically builds up the mystery of what happens in this book and who the antagonists are over the course of about 100-150 pages. And the tension is built up so perfectly that I wish I did not know what happened. So again, we're going to talk full spoilers. So if you don't want to be spoiled at all, please go read it, come back, and please do come back. I like the discussions, and I really like the views. So Salem's Lot is a small town in Maine, completely made up, supposedly, probably based on a couple towns up in Maine, as most of King's other locations are. And it's not so much named after the holy city as it is named after a feral pig. So it's a small town with all of the typical small town drama that you would expect. You know, some cheating husbands, some crackpot thieves, some town drunks, local little skiffs like that. Until, that is, it gets a particularly nasty problem. The book and the movie, well, the book and its adaptation, I shouldn't really call it a movie because it originally came to television in a 3-hour special. They take very different routes to kind of explore this theme of this small town with a major problem. It's sort of like the book took the back roads to its destination while the movie sped on down the highway. And while I think both of them are pretty great in their own ways, I think the book totally owns that rising action. And it's completely missing almost from the movie, which is a bit unfortunate. But again, the movie has its pluses, and I think it's a great adaptation. It's maybe not one of the top adaptations of a Stephen King book or story, but one of the better ones at least. And until the mystery is revealed in the book after those 150 pages, you really don't have much of a clue as to what's going on. There are subtle hints, little teases. King even plays with our expectations a bit, like he does in this passage, where one character is asked about the Marston house, this particularly Bates Motel-ish kind of building that sort of looms over the town, and, you know, pretty much a perfect location for an antagonist to be chilling at. Ghosts, the old party smiled, and there was something very disquieting about that smile. A barracuda might smile like that. No, no ghosts. He placed a faint emphasis on that last word, as if there might be something up there that was even worse. And there most definitely was a problem that was worse, a being up there that was worse. It was actually a vampire, which is pretty cool, something that is almost missing from most other Stephen King books, and I think is great for his second novel, being that it's something that readers are, one, familiar with, and two, almost not really expecting, because the first third of this book is very grounded in reality. Again, it's those small town problems. But once the vampire starts kind of taking over, once its presence is known, all those little problems, the bad wives, the bad husbands, the bad bus drivers, the bad realty guy, all those sort of disappear. They don't really seem important anymore. And actually, once the vampire starts coming around and biting people and changing their views on things, a lot of those problems actually go away. There's one particular character, the Junkyard Hunchback, who has a nasty sort of obsession with one particular girl he finds attractive but also slutty at the same time. Once they're both vampires, they end up together. And King doesn't really touch on that. It's just kind of this aside kind of thrown in there. But it's something you don't really see much, where these people who are, by all accounts, dead and in some sort of different reality, for the most part, are happy. It's a little weird, a little kind of twisted. But, I mean, what do you expect from a Stephen King novel, right? Of course, we humans, we non-bloodsuckers, we can't exactly have all these vampires running around, let alone this big bad vampire that seems like it's something out of ancient history. I don't know if it's supposed to be Dracula. He's mostly referred to in the book as him, although he purports to go by the name Barlow. So we get this kind of protagonist team together. We get a little kid who's basically the smartest one you know, and a priest more concerned about his spilled whiskey than anything to do with his congregation, a stand-in for Stephen King himself, and a woman who does not know how to make a good decision for the life of her. Oh, and let me not forget the old doctor and the old school teacher, both of whom are not in the best of health and meet with somewhat unfortunate ends. Well, once they all get their act together, they handle this whole mess the best they can. Which means they all die, except for the two of them. The stand-in for Stephen King, whose name goes by Ben, and the little kid, who's basically a 1970s Seth Green, whose name is Mark. And the rest of them die. Cruelly, horribly. It's a really depressing end, especially in the film, but even in Salem's Lot represents a huge evolution in Stephen King's talent when you compare it to Carrie, despite the fact that it was published only about a year later, a year and some change later. The structure and storyline is markedly improved with far more in-depth studies of characters and interpersonal relationships. And King almost seems to be channeling his inner poet in a way, with these long, extrapolated, picturesque kind of asides about the town, about the people that are in it. These passages that are just full of amazing similes and metaphors, the kind that you just never saw in Carrie. And now I'm reading The Shining right now, definitely not present in that one either. It's this kind of interesting blend of prose and poetry. I don't know. It's hard to describe. So let me just pick out a few random quotes that I felt really exemplified some of Stephen King's best work within this book. The curves of her body were heroic, Rabelaisian. Watching her in motion at her 8-burner electric stove was like watching the restless movements of the tide or the migration of sand dunes. If you don't know what Rabelaisian means, don't worry. I didn't either. I looked it up, and for the record, here's what it means. According to Webster, marked by gross, robust humor, extravagance or caricature, or bold naturalism. And it's apparently a nod to Francois Rabelais, but this is a Stephen King video, and I already mispronounced enough names and words, so we're not going to go into that right now, because I'd much rather talk about all the character studies and little bits of info that are in Salem's Lot. and all those quotes that I mentioned earlier. There are two character studies that really hit me right off the bat, and it's probably because I'm a father, honestly. Seriously just kind of destroyed me as I read them. Every scene with the baby, for instance, choked up. They were rough. They were rough to read through. This one in particular kind of just killed me a little bit. The scene struck him immediately and forcibly, cutting through the beer haze like the flick of a wet towel. The baby, naked and screaming, blood running from his nose, Sandy holding him, her sleeveless blouse smeared with blood, looking at him over her shoulder, her face contracting with surprise and fear, the diaper on the floor. Yeah. And the scene with the father whose son just died, when he jumps into the grave and onto the coffin, he starts kicking and screaming it, and then he screams, "You ain't gonna throw no dirt on my boy!" That was rough, and I can completely empathize with the character because, yeah, you shouldn't have to bury your son, obviously. And I know a lot of people do, and it's horrible. Every single account is horrible. But there was another scene in the book that was just about as rough, and it was actually redone in the movie to extreme effectiveness, and we'll get to that in a second. And to summarize it, I don't think would really give it justice, so why don't I just, quote Stephen King here, and please forgive my poor voice acting. Put it in your mouth, Corey. Both barrels. Yes, that's right. Easy. That's okay. Yes, your mouth's big enough. Slip it right in there. You know all about slipping it in, don't you? Corey's jaws were open to their widest accommodation. The barrels of the shotgun were pushed back nearly to his palate, and his terrified stomach was trying to retch. The steel was oily against his teeth. Close your eyes, Corey. Corey only stared at him, his swimming eyes as big as tea saucers. Reggie smiled his gentle smile again. Close those baby blue eyes, Corey. Corey closed them. His sphincter let go. He was only dimly aware of it. Reggie pulled both triggers. The hammers fell on empty chambers with a double click-click. Corey fell onto the floor in a dead faint. How insane is that? How insanely good is that? Man, it just gives me shivers. But like I said, not every piece from Salem's Lot that I really loved was character-driven. There were a few other pieces that really kind of hit home. Perhaps because I'm a New Englander. But here, check this one out. Fall and spring came to Jerusalem's lot with the same suddenness of sunrise and sunset in the tropics. The line of demarcation could be as thin as one day. But spring is not the finest season in New England. It's too short, too uncertain, too apt to turn savage on short notice. Even so, there are April days which linger in the memory even after one has forgotten the wife's touch, or the feel of the baby's toothless mouth at the nipple. That's what King does. He gives words to thoughts and feelings that I've always had, but I've never really entertained putting down on paper. Maybe not that nipple part. What King doesn't always do, though, is give every character their due. And in this book, I specifically want to call out one character who I felt got the short end of the stick. That is Susan Norton, the love interest of King's stand-in and one of the main characters. Or so I thought, until about 2/3 of the way through the book, in which she's very unceremoniously killed right off. See, what happens is Susan makes a the dumbest move possible, and she goes off and she basically gets herself killed. She decides that the men who are part of this group of protagonists who are out to kind of slay the vampires are taking too long to get anything done, and so she decides to, without telling anybody, drive up to the location of the head vampire, Barlow, and end it herself. She just so happens to get bitten, and the next time we see her, she's a vampire trying to turn Mark, and the only other appearance she has in the book is when she gets a stake through her heart. And what I found particularly troubling about this section is when she gets turned into a vampire, every single one of the other characters gets this lengthy section about what is happening on this particular night. She does not. She makes her mistake, and pretty much that's the end of Susan. We don't see her actually get killed. That's off camera, as it were. We don't see her really regret anything. We don't see her do anything else. And they kind of address this in the movie. They give her something of a better follow-up, a better ending. But King completely drops the ball in the book for some reason. I don't know what happened there. But in the end, she's basically just kind of treated like a prop. And now, even Barlow, the head vampire, kind of addresses this turn for the character, this treatment of the character, in what turned out to be my favorite scene of the entire book. The protagonists break into the house. This is after Susan tried her thing and failed miserably. But the rest of the protagonists break into the house to confront Barlow, and he's not there. He vacated. He moved away and knew they were coming. But what he did was he left them a note. And in the note was this nice little excerpt. I have no further need of her, that is, Susan, and so I have left her for you to, how is your idiom? To warm up for the main event, to whet your appetite, if you like. Let us see how well you like the appetizer to the main course you contemplate, shall we? So Susan's an appetizer? And is that Stephen King speaking through Barlow, saying that he just has no further need of this character and he's basically shelving her, getting rid of her? What's the idiom? Fridging her? I sure hope not, but it's kind of hard not to see it that way. But taking a step back for a second, this scene I mentioned is probably my favorite in the entire book, and it's missing from the movie, but it's my favorite because it gave me a good laugh. The sarcasm in it just completely threw me off guard, and that note just so happened to inspire. I had a couple ideas of what to pair with Salem's Lot when I was reading it. Vampire wine, of course. Lagunitas Sucks was another one. And even Cutty Sark, which is mentioned as Father Callahan's, the priest's, favorite drink of choice, the favorite whiskey. Well, once I read that note that Barlow left, I knew exactly what I had to do. Because in that note, he wrote this: My good friends, Mr. Mears, Mr. Cody, Master Petrie, Father Callahan, enjoy your stay. The Médoc is excellent, procured for me especially by the late owner of this house, whose personal company I was never able to enjoy. Please be my guest if you still have a taste for wine after you have finished the work at hand. Yes, indeed. Though that was written completely, purely in jest, I got myself a Médoc. A 2014 La Patache Médoc Bordeaux, to be precise, which was the only Médoc at my local store, Wines and More, but one that was highly recommended by all of them. I let it sit for about an hour after opening because I read that kind of helps open it up a bit more and increase the flavor. So this has been sitting for about an hour, and I've really only had about a sip until this point. So let's see how it tastes. It's a little bitter. Oh, that aftertaste. Sort of like oak wood chips and cherries. I could taste all sorts of berries in there. As a Bordeaux, it's a blend of different grapes and whatnot, and it's quite good. My wife had an initial sip earlier, and she wasn't a big fan of it. She said it was bitter, and I got that too. But I think after a couple sips, it really opens itself up, and it's quite good. I quite enjoyed this. So yeah, that is the 2014 La Patache Médoc Bordeaux, inspired by what very well be my favorite scene in the book, but again, one that is unfortunately missing from the film. Like I said earlier, the 1979 adaptation of Salem's Lot takes somewhat of a different path toward the same conclusion as Stephen King's original book. The most noticeable difference right off the bat is its kind of shrunken and renamed cast of characters, which was perfectly fine by me because as the book ran on, it got increasingly hard to follow this whole town of characters that Stephen King happened to repeatedly revisit. So Susan's dad, who in the book is just a regular old Joe who likes to barbecue and drink some beers, he becomes the town doctor, who happens to be everybody's doctor, it seems. And we get rid of Dr. Cody from the book. We lose that character. Larry Crockett, the town realtor, played in the movie by Fred Willard, who I will always know as Amy's dad, replaces Corey in that infamous shotgun scene that I talked about earlier. And Susan's ex-beau, renamed from Floyd Tibbet to Ned Tebbets, I don't know why, is one of the movers of Barlow's box at the beginning of the movie. Whereas in the book, it was just another happenstance passing character. Now, Floyd's renaming, I don't quite get. Floyd to Ned? Why? What's wrong with Floyd? But some of the other changes I really understand, especially because it helps get rid of some of the M names. Now, let me just say, there are a lot of M names in this book. We have Mike, Matt, Mark, Marston, Marjorie, McDougal, Miller, and there's probably some more, but enough of that. I could probably go on and on for a little bit. Don't want to keep doing that. All you need to know is this adaptation takes its own path, and it's great, which you would expect because it's directed by Tobe Hooper, who also happened to direct The Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Poltergeist. Like he did with those two films, he imbues Salem's Lot's scenes with a sense of the surreal. And he does this by playing with the camera movement, playing with the frame, just overall addressing things with the camera in a way that gives these performances a certain sense of raw power. The shotgun scene I found particularly effective, as I mentioned. I could almost feel the hurt and anger coming off George Zunza, which I hope is how I say his name, who played the estranged husband, Coley Sawyer. Even without the shotgun going into the mouth, into Fred Willard's mouth, I thought the scene was emotionally evocative. But I did hear that the alternate take of this television adaptation, which was actually a film version, shortened in approximately about half, does include a scene where Fred Willard puts a shotgun in his mouth. I don't think it's necessary. I think it's fine the way it is, because it's one of the strongest scenes in the film, one of the strongest scenes in the book, and it's just perfect. The camera work was also quite notable when Susan and Mark infiltrate the house, as the frame sort of pulls back to show the two in almost miniature, effectively showcasing the enormity and power of the Marston house itself. Oh, and let's not forget pretty much every scene with Straker, Barlow's right-hand man in the book, who sort of becomes his replacement in the movie, really. I mean, he really does. In the book, he is the Igor to Barlow's Dr. Frankenstein. In the movie, he is Dr. Frankenstein, and I guess Barlow is pretty much the monster, right? He has no lines in the movie. In the book, he is charismatic. He is a gentleman. He is seen as being an old-fashioned man, sort of like how Straker is portrayed in the film, but Barlow is that in the book, whereas in the movie, Barlow is a straight-up homage to Nosferatu, which I think was great. I think it's a cool play on the film and a cool, again, homage, but very different from the book. Very effective, though. And it did allow Straker to kind of take on his own personality and add to the movie. But the film has a few hiccups, just like the book. Different hiccups, though. For one, the mystery of the opening. In the book, the two characters are just referred to as the man and the boy. In the film, we know immediately, within the first 5 minutes, who those two characters were. So that kind of rids us of a sense of tension, because we know those characters are going to make it out of this situation. The rest of them, who knows? They're probably going to die because they're not in Mexico, but those two characters, they're obviously going to live. We also almost immediately get introduced to the idea that the antagonists are vampires. Again, like I said, the book ratchets up the tension over about 150 pages before the vampire reveal is given. In the movie, it's within probably the first 20 minutes, and I get it. It's a movie, smaller timeline, condensed timeline. You can't play with your audience as long as you can in a book. Although they do kind of try. They kind of hide the vampire back a little bit. But this reduced timeline also has some problems with the characters as well. For instance, Ben and Susan, Susan being played, of course, by the one and only Mrs. McLean, Bonnie Bedelia, that whole romance just feels extremely forced and unearned. Even the vampire reveal doesn't really feel earned. Although the floating brother at the window, that was a damn cool effect. I really liked that. I thought that was neat. And the scratching at the window, that was just kind of creepy. And, well, if that happened to me, I don't know what I would do. And the Susan part, I again have some contempt for, and it really kind of infuriated me, but for very different reasons than in the book. In the book, again, she gets killed off camera, but in the movie, she goes to the house, she makes the same dumb mistake again, going into the house, and in this one, she kind of goes after Mark, and she doesn't accompany him, she's kind of trying to help him. But then she willingly goes to Barlow. And Straker even mentions that this is what she wanted. She wanted to go to him. Like, what kind of treatment is that for a character? And again, the movie does help give her a better ending because she's in the very last scene of the film. But it doesn't do much to redeem her. She comes off as narcissistic, just an awful person. Oh, and let's touch on the scene where Mark and Ben are leaving the house, and they set the house on fire, and without even knowing Susan is a vampire, not even knowing that she's dead for certain, Ben sets the house on fire, and what does he say? Oh, sorry, Susan. Forgive me. What an awful person you are. You're lighting this house on fire with the woman that you love trapped inside. You don't know if she's dead. You're not even going to try to save her? What kind of person are you? Infuriating. So King would go on to revisit Salem's Lot in a few of his other books. Most notably Night Shift, which we'll be talking about in just a couple videos. And as I mentioned, The Dark Tower, which acts as something of a pseudo-sequel to this book. But there are a number of other connections within the story. Not outright connections, but subtle little nods to what would come later. There's references to Rita Hayworth in The Shawshank Redemption, to It, and even back to Carrie. But I think one of the biggest kind of connections is something that was not even really written out. And that's King's portrayal of a sort of magic in children. The sort of special ability that children have that once they reach adulthood, they just happen to lose. And now this would go on to be explored at length in some of his later books, most especially It, which I already mentioned. But in this book, he almost seems like he tries to define it. Take a look at these two particular excerpts that I pulled out. The night before, Matt Burke had faced such a dark thing and had been stricken by a heart seizure brought on by fright. Tonight, Mark Petrie had faced one, and then minutes later lay in the lap of sleep, the plastic cross still grasped loosely in his right hand like a child's rattle. Such is the difference between men and boys. So yeah, such is the difference between men and boys in that one, and then we have this one as well. The essential and defining characteristic of childhood is not the effortless merging of dream and reality, but only alienation. There are no words for childhood's dark turns and exhalations. A wise child recognizes it and submits it to the necessary consequences. A child who counts the cost is a child no longer. Well, I'm clearly no longer a child anymore, and so I don't have that magic anymore. So, sort of like how Jaws kept some moviegoers from going into the water the summer following that film's release, after reading Salem's Lot, I went and I found my cross. And I'm wearing it, and I'm not going to be taking it off. I sort of figure, better be safe than sorry, right? But this has been Drunk on Writing's second Stephen King dissection. This time on Salem's Lot, of course, which, again, I think this is probably one of my favorite Stephen King books. It's certainly right up there with The Stand and It and Under the Dome, which unfortunately got tarnished by a bad TV series, but we will get to that in due time. In the meantime, please be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, follow me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Amiibo if you're on Amiibo. If you're not, you should be. And go ahead and sign up at patreon.com/drunkonwriting. Get the show early for just $1, or chip in a few extra and get bloopers, Q&A, behind the scenes, fun stuff. Just come on and chat with me. Hopefully you will come back next time when we talk about The Shining, and slight spoilers. I know I said I was reading it. I have to say, I'm not enjoying it. I don't like it. I don't like the book, but I'll talk about that more next time. Hopefully you will join me. Until then, cheers and keep on writing.